I never believed in ghost stories, not really. I thought they were for people who needed to fill the silence of the night with something more exciting than the hum of fluorescent lights and the ticking of a clock. But all that changed when I started my new job as the night security guard at Ravenwood Medical Storage, a facility on the edge of town that looked more like an abandoned hospital than an active workplace. The manager told me it was a low-maintenance job: monitor the cameras, keep a log, and make rounds every hour. Easy money, he said. I needed it, so I didn't ask too many questions. The first night was quiet, though the place itself felt off from the start. The main hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with heavy metal doors, each marked with faded room numbers that didn't seem to follow any order. The building was old, the kind of old that smelled like bleach and damp concrete, with a lingering undertone of something sweet and rotten, like fruit left to spoil. I brushed it off as chemical residue from the medical supplies stored there. My little office was tucked in the corner of the second floor, filled with monitors that flickered in grainy black and white static. The screens showed every corridor, every storage room, every exit. There were no windows, just the endless hum of machines. Around 1:15 a.m., the silence broke. The monitor for hallway C flickered, not the usual static flicker, but a sharp, rhythmic interference, like something passing between the camera and the light source. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. For half a second, I thought I saw a shape, tall, thin, human-like, standing just at the edge of the light. Then it was gone. I checked the clock. 1:16. I laughed it off, convincing myself it was fatigue or maybe a bug on the lens. The mind plays tricks when it's late. When I did my second round, I passed through hallway C. It was empty, silent. The air felt heavier, though, like the hallway itself was breathing with me. As I reached the end, I noticed something: a single wet footprint on the tile, leading toward the old elevator shaft that hadn't worked in years. I crouched to check it, touched it with my glove. It was cold, fresh. I called on the radio to the only other guard, Henry, but he didn't answer. His post was on the first floor. I sighed, radioed again, and got only static. When I got back to my office, the monitor for hallway C showed the same thing I'd just seen in person, except now there were two wet footprints. By the second night in the house, Julia found herself fighting against the urge to dread nightfall. She busied herself with unpacking until nearly midnight, forcing her focus on the sound of cardboard tearing, books thumping onto shelves, and Emily's soft snores coming from down the hall. Michael had fallen asleep early, leaving her alone in the living room. The old grandfather clock in the hall marked each passing minute with its heavy tick, and though she told herself the sound was comforting, she couldn't shake the sense that the rhythm was listening as much as it was keeping time. Around 1 in the morning, Julia froze mid-step. From the far wall of the living room came a muffled noise, a faint scrape, followed by a whisper so thin she thought she might have imagined it. She held her breath, straining to hear. It came again, more distinct this time, a murmur that almost resembled a word, though she couldn't understand it. Julia pressed her ear closer to the wall, her pulse quickening. The whisper stopped abruptly, leaving only the oppressive silence behind. She backed away, suddenly aware of how the shadows seemed thicker in the corners of the room. The next morning, Julia mentioned the noises to Michael as casually as she could over breakfast. He laughed it off, saying old houses had their quirks: pipes knocking, wood shifting, critters in the walls. "Don't spook yourself, Jules. It's an adventure, right?" he said, flashing his usual reassuring smile. Emily nodded along, but then quietly added, "I heard them too." Julia froze. Emily's tone wasn't playful or dramatic. It was matter of fact. "They were saying my name," the girl whispered, her eyes dropping to her bowl of cereal. Michael ruffled Emily's hair quickly, dismissing it as a dream, but Julia caught the nervous flicker in his eyes. Later that day, Julia stopped by the small grocery store in town. The shelves were half empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and the cashier, a thin man with hollow cheeks, watched her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When Julia asked if the house they had moved into was old, he paused for an unnatural beat before answering. "Old enough," he muttered, sliding her change across the counter without touching her hand. She pressed further, asking if the previous family had lived there long. His jaw tightened. "Not long," he said, before turning away to pretend he had other work. That short exchange echoed in her mind the entire walk home that night. Julia left a lamp on in the hallway outside Emily's room, determined not to let the darkness get the better of her. She dozed lightly, her ears tuned to every creak and sigh of the house. Sometime after midnight, she woke to the sound of footsteps again, slow and deliberate, moving from the living room toward the stairs. Her stomach clenched. This time, she was sure it wasn't the house settling. She sat upright in bed, listening. The footsteps paused at the base of the stairs, and then, just as the silence threatened to break her resolve, Julia heard her daughter's bedroom door creak open for the second night in a row. Henry didn't come back the next night. The supervisor said he'd called out, but no one could reach him. I asked if that happened often. The supervisor's face twitched. "People quit this job all the time," he said flatly. "You last a month, you're already ahead of the curve." That night, I was alone. I tried to distract myself, made extra coffee, flipped through the maintenance logs. There were pages torn out, whole sections missing from the records around 2013 to 2014. Whatever was stored in the basement back then, it had been erased from the system. The rest of the logs mentioned something called Sector D, though it wasn't on any of the building maps. My curiosity got the better of me, and around 2:30, I decided to take a look. The stairwell to the basement was colder than usual. The deeper I went, the less sound there was. No hum from the lights, no creak from the pipes. Just silence. At the bottom, a steel door stood slightly ajar. It had no label, no lock, just an old fingerprint reader blinking red. When I pushed it open, the stench hit me first, a mix of antiseptic and decay. The room was empty except for a single gurney in the middle, draped with a stained white sheet that I stood there, frozen, until I noticed the walls. They weren't solid concrete. They were lined with metal panels, each engraved with serial numbers. A faint tapping echoed behind one of them, steady, slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I stepped closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The tapping stopped, and then, just under the hum of my breath, I heard whispering. Dozens of voices, layered, overlapping. I couldn't make out words, just emotion. Pain. Pleading. I bolted upstairs, slamming the door behind me. When I reached my office, the camera for the basement, one that had been offline since I started, was suddenly on. The feed showed the gurney, and the sheet was moving. Sleep became impossible after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sheet rising and falling, like someone, or something, was underneath. I thought about quitting, but something in me needed to understand. Needed proof that what I was seeing wasn't just exhaustion or paranoia. On the fourth night, the cameras glitched again. For several seconds, every feed went to static, except one. The basement. It showed a figure standing next to the gurney. No features, no light, just a dark silhouette against the pale wall. It moved differently from a person, too slow, like it was learning how to stand. I stared until my reflection in the monitor blurred with it. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the feed cut out. I ran downstairs with my flashlight. The basement door was open. The gurney was still there, empty now, but the sheet lay on the floor, twisted, damp. The smell was stronger this time, sharp and sour, burning my throat. I was about to leave when I saw it. Something scratched into the wall beside the gurney. "Don't watch." Fresh, jagged, as if carved with fingernails. That's when I heard it. Footsteps above me. Heavy, deliberate, pacing in circles right above the basement ceiling, right above where I stood. But I was supposed to be the only one in the building. I killed the flashlight, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped. Then, from the darkness, a whisper came, inches from my ear. "He's still here." I bolted upstairs, slamming my office door shut. The monitors were all blank now, except one. Hallway C. The same shape from the first night stood there again, facing the camera, motionless. But this time, I realized something that turned my blood cold. Its face wasn't a blur anymore. It was Henry. The next morning, Megan convinced herself she'd overreacted. Cruises had security cameras, trained staff, and plenty of people around. Surely she wasn't in any real danger. Still, as she made her way to the breakfast buffet, she couldn't shake the memory of the slow, deliberate knock on her door. The corridor outside her cabin seemed longer than usual, lined with identical doors that gave no hint of the people behind them. Two uniformed crew members passed her, speaking softly in a language she didn't recognize. As they walked by, she noticed one of them glancing over his shoulder at her. Not just a quick glance, but a long, assessing look, as though measuring her reaction. Breakfast should have been a comfort. Sunlight pouring through panoramic windows, the clatter of plates, the smell of coffee and fresh pastries. But Megan's attention kept snagging on small details. A waiter refilling water glasses seemed to be lingering at her table just a beat too long. A young couple at the next table whispered rapidly to each other and kept glancing toward the entrance. And when she finally stood to leave, she caught sight of the man from the night before, the one in the dark suit, seated alone near the back. His hands were folded neatly on the table, his plate untouched. He didn't blink when their eyes met. This time, Megan didn't wait to see if he would vanish. She turned and left. She decided to spend the afternoon exploring the ship. Deck 7 had several quiet lounges and a library that smelled faintly of old paper despite the ocean air. In the library, she struck up a brief conversation with an older British woman named Helen, who was knitting in the corner. When Megan mentioned seeing a man in a dark suit, Helen's needles paused mid-click. Tall, thin, doesn't eat? Helen asked, her voice low. I've seen him too. 3 years ago, on this very ship. Different cruise. He was watching people then as well. Before Megan could ask more, another passenger entered, and Helen's demeanor instantly brightened, as if she hadn't said anything at all. That evening, Megan noticed a change in the ship's atmosphere. The wind picked up, rattling the glass doors on the outer decks. The hallways seemed dimmer, shadows stretching farther than they should. She passed a security camera mounted above the stairwell and had the sudden, irrational feeling that it wasn't connected to anything at all. Back in her cabin, she locked the door and tried to distract herself with a movie on the tiny wall-mounted TV. Halfway through, the screen flickered, briefly showing what looked like live footage of the ship's exterior decks at night. In the grainy image, a lone figure stood at the railing, unmoving, staring out at the sea. She shut off the TV, her heart pounding. The ship's engines throbbed beneath her feet, steady and relentless. But she couldn't shake the growing sense that the ocean majesty wasn't just carrying her across the Caribbean. It was carrying something else, something that didn't belong among the living. The elevator's ancient cables screamed as they strained against time, dust, and rust. The air thickened with the stench of burnt metal and something deeper, something organic. I stared at the flickering red light as the floor indicator crept upward. B1. 1. 2. My pulse pounded in my ears. Henry's voice still echoed faintly in my head. Don't open the door, but I couldn't move. Curiosity, fear, whatever it was, something rooted me to the floor as the elevator reached my level and stopped with a low, shuddering clunk. The doors creaked, metal grinding as they slid halfway open, leaving just enough of a gap for me to see what was inside. For a moment, all I saw was darkness. Then my flashlight caught something, bare feet, gray and lifeless, standing just beyond the threshold. The smell hit me next. Decay, rot, formaldehyde. The light trembled across pale, stretched skin, and I realized those weren't just feet. It was a man, or what used to be one, standing motionless in the corner, head hanging low. I whispered, Henry. The figure twitched. Its head jerked up with a wet snap, and though its face was barely human anymore, I recognized him. His eyes were wide, glassy, and full of something that looked like terror, or maybe warning. Then, without a word, the elevator plunged. The doors slammed shut, and it dropped with a gut-wrenching sound that echoed through the entire building. I staggered back, clutching the wall. A deep vibration ran beneath my feet, followed by silence. When I looked up, the indicator light was dead again. I called down the shaft, but there was no reply, only the slow drip of something wet hitting the steel floor below. That's when the static started again. Not from the walls this time, but from my radio. I lifted it to my ear, and through the static came a voice. Hoarse, broken, Sector D, behind the wall. Then it cut out. The next few hours were a blur. I barely remember locking the elevator shaft or barricading the office door. All I know is that by 3 a.m., I was staring at the monitors, trying to piece together what Henry's voice meant. Behind the wall. Which wall? The answer came when I checked the floor plans again. Sector D wasn't missing, it was covered up. On the old blueprint, the section between Hallway C and the east stairwell had once led to another corridor. But on the new plans, that space was marked as foundation reinforcement. In other words, sealed off. I grabbed my flashlight, a crowbar, and the building master key, and made my way to hallway C. The air grew colder with every step, like walking into a freezer. The walls looked the same as always, stained paint, flickering lights. But halfway down, something caught my eye. A section of plaster didn't match the rest. It was smoother, newer. Someone had patched it recently. I tapped it with the crowbar. Hollow. I hit harder. The plaster cracked, dust spilling into the air. With every swing, my heart pounded harder until finally, a hole opened wide enough for my light to pass through. On the other side was another hallway, completely untouched, frozen in time. I crawled through the opening. The air was heavy, humid, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and rust. The floor was tiled in faded green squares, smeared with something dark. Along the walls, old hospital doors hung slightly ajar, their windows covered in grime. I shone my light on the first door, D1, subject storage. The second door made my stomach twist, D2, Henry Wallace. My breath caught. Henry Wallace, my coworker. His name wasn't on any employee record I could find earlier. Was he part of whatever this experiment was? My hands shook as I reached for the handle. It opened with a faint hiss, the air inside thicker, warmer, almost alive. The room was small, lined with medical equipment from another decade. Rusted four stands, cracked monitors, and a cot in the corner. On it lay a file, sealed in a plastic sleeve. D2 test results. I opened it. Inside were photos, grainy black and white images of a man strapped to a table, eyes open, mouth sewn shut. The report said, subject exhibited signs of reanimation 72 hours post-mortem. Speech patterns fragmented. Cognitive activity unstable. Subject terminated after repeated containment breach. The words terminated and repeated breach were circled in red. Below them, someone had scrawled a note by hand. Do not destroy the body. It returns. A sound snapped me out of my trance, a faint dragging noise from the hallway. I turned off my flashlight, heart hammering. The sound grew louder, closer, like something heavy scraping across tile. I held my breath. Through the narrow window of the door, I saw movement. A shadow passed slowly across the glass, pausing just outside. Then came a voice, low, gurgling, broken. You shouldn't be here. The doorknob twitched. I stepped back, ready to swing the crowbar, when the power surged. Every light in Sector D flickered on at once, revealing the hallway beyond and the thing standing in it. It wore Henry's uniform, but its face was stretched, like skin pulled too tight over bone, eyes glowing faintly under the buzzing lights. It stared at me through the glass, expressionless, until its mouth tore open wider than any human mouth should. Then it screamed. I ran. I sprinted through the corridor, the scream still echoing behind me. Every door I passed slammed shut by itself, the lights bursting overhead one by one. The building was collapsing into chaos, as if the walls themselves were trying to keep me in. I reached the hole I'd broken through earlier and dove back into hallway C. The moment I crossed over, the lights died completely. Total blackness. The silence was unbearable. I tried my radio. Nothing. My flashlight flickered weakly, battery dying. I stumbled toward the office, breathing hard, when I heard it again, the footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging. Not one pair, several. They were coming from every direction. The beam of my flashlight caught glimpses, shapes moving just beyond sight, hands brushing along the walls, faces flickering in and out like static. The voices followed, whispering, pleading, laughing. Some sounded like Henry, some didn't sound human at all. I backed into the office and slammed the door shut. Inside, the monitors came alive on their own. Every feed was active again. The cameras showed the building, every hallway, every stairwell, every corner. And in every single one, there were figures, dozens of them, standing motionless, facing the cameras. I watched in frozen terror as they all began to move, slowly turning their heads toward my office. The power surged once more, and on the main screen, text flickered in blocky green letters across the top. Sector D recontainment failure. Then everything went black. I don't remember much after the blackout. I woke up in daylight, slumped over the desk, the monitors dead, the lights on again. My clock said 7:42 a.m. My shift was over. Somehow, I had survived the night. The walls showed no signs of damage, The cameras no longer worked, and the hole I'd broken in a hallway C was patched again, as if it had never been there. When I stumbled outside, the morning air felt unreal, too warm, too bright. My phone had 20 missed calls from the supervisor. I called him back, trying to explain what happened, but he interrupted me halfway through. "You're done," he said. "Don't come back. The site's being shut down for inspection." I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt hollow. None of it made sense. No one believed me about the tapes, or Henry, or the voices. When I drove past the building a week later, it was surrounded by caution tape. A sign hung on the fence. "Property of U.S. Health Research Archives. Do not enter." That night, as I lay in bed, I finally began to drift off, convincing myself it was over. Then my phone buzzed. A voicemail. No number. I played it half asleep. Static filled the line for a few seconds, followed by a faint, ragged whisper. "Sector D. Open again." I froze, phone clutched in my hand. Then, faintly, underneath the static, another sound played, the slow, rhythmic hum of the elevator rising. And I swear, even from miles away, I heard it stop on my floor.